The Laughing Cavalier here, presenting to you another tale of these troubled times. Today, I'm going to do a video discussing the flags carried by the various armies involved in the English Civil War. I briefly touched upon this topic in the first part of my Cromwell review, but I thought it would be a good idea to expand upon it a bit further. Before I begin, I will highly recommend the following books, which you can get from Caliber Books. These are probably some of the best on the subject. Some are a bit old now, but they're still reliable sources compiled by some dedicated historians. First off, I shall look at the standards carried by the English infantry regiments, both royalist and parliamentarian. When dealing with flags, there are certain heraldic terms that are used. The field is the term used to denote the general colour of the flag. So, for example, this flag would have an orange field. The canton is the term used to describe a smaller flag within the larger flag, such as the current Jack of the Royal Navy, which has the Union flag in the canton. There are certain words used to describe the colours. Gules means red, azure means blue, and vert means green, for example, although I won't be using these terms during the video. Symbols and devices on the flags also have terms applied to them. Stars are referred to as mulets, rectangles as billets, but, as with the colours, I won't be using these terms for the sake of simplicity. During the Civil War, regiments would be divided into companies, usually somewhere between 6 and 11 companies per regiment, each with its own colour that would fly in battle. Each company was led by a captain, except for the first 3 companies, which would be led by the colonel, lieutenant colonel, and sergeant major of the regiment respectively, sergeant major often being abbreviated to simply major. A few different systems were used during the war by the regiments. It should be noted that they were not referred to as systems at the time. These are terms that have been applied later, and the systems themselves are full of contradictions. The systems that have been identified are the following: the Venn system, which was arguably the most popular, the system used by the London train bands, the Peachey system, the Gironi system, and the Stripey system, not to mention a few flags that do not fit any of these systems. First off, the Venn system. In this system, the colour of the colonel's company would be a plain flag with one colour. The lieutenant colonels would have a St George's cross in the top left canton, as would every other flag after that. The major's colour would have what is called a pile wavy coming out of the canton, pile wavy being a wavy line, like the example on screen. After this, each company would be denoted based on a symbol and the number of these symbols. In this example, the first captain's colour has 1 star, the second has 2, and the third has 3. As mentioned, many other symbols would be used. The 5-pointed star was probably the most common. 8-pointed stars were occasionally used as well, possibly by the Earl of Essex's regiment, for example. Balls and rectangles were quite popular symbols as well. Symbols could be any colour, although white does seem to be the most popular. As mentioned, this was arguably the most popular and widespread system, used by both royalists and the parliamentarians. Before the Civil War, the country did not have a professional army, but it did have the trained bands, the part-time militia who, at the start of the war, were the closest the country had to a body of actual soldiers. We are very fortunate that a royalist spy recorded the flags flown by the trained bands of the City of London, who were fighting for Parliament. The London trained bands had existed long before the war, but were completely reformed in 1642, with most of the regiments being referred to by colour, which was reflected on their flag. The regiments were the Blue Regiment, the Red Regiment, the White Regiment, the Yellow Regiment, the Orange Regiment, and the Green Regiment, which were later expanded to additional auxiliary regiments with the same colour designations. The only regiments that were tied to a particular part of London were the Southwark Trains Bands, the Tower Hamlets Train Bands, City of Westminster Train Bands, and the Westminster Auxiliaries. The coloured regiments generally followed a system exactly the same as the Venn system, with the exception of the major's colour, which would be denoted by 1 device. Thus, the first captain's colour would have 2 devices, the second 3, and so on. The red train bands, and many of the auxiliary regiments, interestingly, used pile wavies rather than standard devices. Even a few regiments, such as the Orange Auxiliary Regiment, used the Venn system. The most unique flags used were that of the Tower Hamlets Regiment, whose colonel's colour bore this motto, as did every colour after that, which the major's colour being denoted by a white ball and so on. The Peachey system was similar to the Venn, except that instead of devices, pile wavies were used, as has been seen with the London Auxiliary Regiments. On the royalist side, we have Sir William Pennyman's regiment that had green flags and used this pile system, although some reference is made to the standard Venn system possibly being employed at some later date. The Gironi system was a much rarer system, and we can only find a few regiments that used it, all of them being on the royalist side. The best example of this system is the regiment of Sir Alan Apsley. The first 3 colours followed the established Venn system, but the captain's colour were different. The first captains had 4 triangles, half black, half white, the second 6 triangles, and the third 8. Only 6 flags were recorded for this regiment, meaning it probably only had 6 companies. The stripy system is even harder to describe and may not have been an actual coherent system. After the Battle of Naseby, the parliamentarians captured 3 colours that looked something like this, although the latter 2 were heavily damaged. The only other example was taken from the Royalists at Preston in 1648. It can be assumed that a certain number of stripes would denote the company. It is possible this was an old system used by the trained bands. Finally, we have the flags that don't fit into any system. The 2 most prominent flags come from 2 of the more well-known Royalist regiments. First off, the King's Life Guard of Foot. This regiment flew a unique system which, instead of having the St George's Cross in the canton, had it spread across the entire left side of the flag. The field of the flags were all red. The colonels had a lion on it with a crown and the motto Dieu et mon droit, which translates to God and my right, one of the mottos of the royal family. The lieutenant colonels had the dragon of the Prince of Wales with a crown above it. The majors a portcullis, one of the other symbols of the royal family. The captain's colours used a red and white Tudor rose with a crown above it, 1 for the first captain, 2 for the second, and then 3 for every other company after that. 6 of these standards with 3 roses were captured along with the rest, meaning that the Life Guard still had 11 companies at the Battle of Naseby. Then there is Prince Rupert's regiment of foot. We have 2 sources on their colours. Firstly, these 2 colours were recorded by Richard Simmons, a trooper in the King's Life Guard of Horse, who left a very detailed diary of his service from the year 1643 to 1646. He recorded the colours as belonging to Rupert's foot at the storming of Leicester in May 1645. The first belonging to Colonel Russell, and the second to Major Mitchell. The second source comes from a manuscript by Termeil, who recorded the standards captured by the new model after Naseby. 4 very badly damaged colours are recorded, showing a similar pattern to the ones described by Simmons, with the exception of blue stripes being present. It is possible that these 4 standards belong to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and maybe the 5th captains' companies, but it's difficult to say. This is a conjectural reconstruction of the flags based on what we have, although there are many details still missing on the other standards carried by the regiment. In terms of surviving examples of flags, we have very few. The only one we can be certain was used during the Civil War was this standard for St John Gell's regiment, a parliamentarian regiment. The flag itself is about 6 foot by 6 foot and is made of silk. It has a yellow field and 4 blue stars, denoting that this was most likely the 4th captain's colour, if it is using the Venn system. I'll now take a quick look at the flags flown by the Scots, both Royalist and Covenanter. Much like the English, the Scots also had a standard for every company. Again, the colonels would have 1 colour, usually white for most regiments, but with the addition of some sort of motto, slogan and or image upon it, such as this example taken at the Battle of Dunbar, possibly that of Lord Holmes's regiment. After that, every other colour would use the saltire pattern of the Scottish flag. Usually the cross would be white, although a few regiments had either yellow, black or red crosses. The field of the flags, much like their English counterparts, came in a variety of colours. Blue and red seem to be the most common colours, with others also having yellow, green and black fields. Some regiments had an ordered system in which to identify the captain's colours. Lieutenant Colonel William Bailey's regiment had the following system, with the major's colour having 1 red star surrounded by a laurel wreath, the second 3 stars, and the 4th 5 stars. However, most colours we know didn't have this system. Captains seem to have adopted a wide variety of symbols on their colours. Sir David Holmes' regiment, for example, had this system with their colours, with some examples including a crescent for the 1st captain, a star for the 2nd, and a fleur-de-lis for the 5th. Every Covenanter colour would have a motto. Pre-1647, the motto was usually Covenant for religion, crown and country, or a variant of this. After 1647, when the engaged faction of the Covenanters allied with the king, most regiments modified it to Covenant for religion, king and kingdoms. At the last battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Worcester, one regiment adopted a different style of colours. The King's Life Guard of Foot, not to be confused with the earlier English regiment that served Charles I, was a Scottish regiment that fought for Charles II at Worcester. The modern-day Scots Guards claim to be a continuation of this regiment. Its colours differed from the Covenanter ones. They all had a dark blue field with no saltire, each colour having its own symbol. The colonels had the coat of arms of the King in Scotland on one side, the old Covenanter motto on the other. Lieutenant colonels, the unicorn of Scotland, the majors a lion, presumably of England, and so on. And now the Scots Royalist flags. Details about flags used by the Scottish Royalist troops from around 1644 to 1646 are rather sketchy. The main Scots Royalist field army was led by the Marquess of Montrose. He did not have many men, the bulk of his foot being made up of 3 regiments of Irish soldiers, and the rest Highlanders with a handful of more professionalised Scottish regulars, so these Scottish regulars may not have carried many colours. The details of one regiment, the Strathbogie Regiment, are recorded. They flew at least one standard with the red line rampant of the King of Scots in the centre, the crown and cipher of the King above it, and at the top of the standard was the slogan, "For God and the King and against all traitors," and then beneath the line, "God save the King." The flag was either yellow or white, but we cannot be sure. One of the standards of Gordon of Middlemore's Strathrathan Highlanders is also known, that being a white colour with the coat of arms of the colonel in the centre, meaning that this colour most likely belonged to the colonel's company. In 1650, one interesting colour is recorded for Montrose's Lifeguard of Foot, a regiment that he raised during the Third Civil War. It was black, with a picture of the severed head of King Charles I, and the Latin motto, Deo et Vitricibus Armis, which translates to God and Victorious Arms. Finally, a brief note on Irish flags. We have very little information on the flags flown by them during the war. The only eyewitness account of them I have come across is from an account published in The True Informer, a parliamentarian pamphlet. The True Informer lists many different flags, each with a variety of colours: red, yellow, blue, green, purple, and so on. They all have some sort of Catholic image in the centre, such as Jesus on the cross, the Virgin Mary, and so on, usually with a Latin motto underneath. To the bottom left of these symbols, we have the royal cipher of Charles I, CR with a crown above it, and below it the motto Vivat Carolus Rex, which is Latin for Long Live King Charles. In the canton, we have a yellow flag, with the red cross of St. Patrick. Now this has caused some debate. Up to this point, the St. Patrick's cross was not really associated with Ireland. The cross of Burgundy, used by the Spanish, may have been used by some Irish troops during the Elizabethan Wars in Ireland, and some Irish troops had served in Spain's army, but some historians are unsure as to whether the standard would have had this, or whether this is parliamentarian propaganda. Well, thank you for joining me for this video. Part 2 will cover the standards carried by the cavalry regiments during the Civil War. This has been the Laughing Cavalier, wishing you a good day.